Virtual reality can be seen as an escape, a place to hang out, or a place to just chill. All of the above are true. On the flip side, it can also be used to do daring activities with the safeties of them not being real. You can walk on planks of wood over whole cities, fall, and then just take the headset off. You can climb mountains, fight space aliens, and even fight wars. Let's dive into the history of the technologies and why they are important in the modern games industry and where it should go next. Thoughts of entering virtual worlds have been around for over 70 years. There have been many factors that have caused the products to fail, such as expensive price tags and a lack of hardware performance. The ability to simulate different senses has always been interesting, with products such as Morton Halig's Sensorama. That was nothing like the modern virtual reality headset, as it was more of a room or an exhibit than a headset. Virtual reality as we know it was born in the 1960s when Halig patented the telesphere mask and the term HMD, which stands for head-mounted display. A year later, the headset began to be prototyped, with the idea to put two screens for each eye, as well as a head tracking system. By the mid-60s, the idea had somewhat taken off in the scientific community, with Ivan Sutherland creating the quote-unquote ultimate display. In the 70s and 80s, as the optometry required to simulate virtual reality became even more and more advanced, so did the haptic devices and the computers that were needed to simulate the experiences. Of course, the technologies were not very realistic, as 40 years later, the graphics are still not up to the real-life standards, in both VR and flat games. On August 14, 1995, Nintendo formally released their venture into virtual reality spaces, and it failed miserably. The Virtual Boy offered a purely red, stereoscopic 3D view into games. However, unlike the virtual reality we know today, it was essentially a viewfinder, except worse in every way. Clunky, barely portable, and the games were there. It was Nintendo's biggest flop, selling only 770,000 units. There are many reasons why, primarily due to the fact that it was unfinished, barely promoted, and released only 1 year before the Nintendo 64, which was released in September 1996. The hardware limitations of the console also presented some issues. It was built as a bridge between 16-bit and 64-bit gaming. The price tag didn't help either. It was priced at $180, with only 22 games ever being released on the system. That's in stark contrast with Nintendo's other system, the NES and the SNES having 706 and 1,757 games respectively. By the time the Nintendo 64 took off, the Virtual Boy was all but forgotten. Before moving on to the development of modern virtual reality, here are some other major developments worth taking note of. The creation of the Virtual Vietnam Experience in 1997. This was created by Georgia Tech and Emory University in the hopes of using exposure therapy to aid Vietnam veterans with PTSD. The introduction of Google Street View in 2007 and the stereoscopic 3D modes in Street View. Palmer Luckey created the first prototype of what would become the Oculus Rift in 2010, when they were only 18 years old. Some of the technical specifications included a 90-degree field of view, and it needed to be plugged into a computer to render and generate 3D images. This prototype sparked a renaissance in the concept of virtual reality headsets. Networking on forums, Palmer ran into and started talking to id Software's co-founder, John Carmack. He asked to buy one of the headsets from Palmer, and instead, he was just given one. Later that year, Carmack showcased the technology at the Electronic Entertainment Expo, with Carmack officially joining the company in 2013. John Carmack was also accused of potentially stealing some virtual reality tech on behalf of Oculus. He has since left the company, taking on more of an observer role. A year earlier, in 2012, a Kickstarter was published for the Oculus Rift, raising over $2 million, officially making the Oculus Rift a reality. Palmer stated in 2012 that he won't make a penny of profit off of this project. The goal is to pay for the cost of parts, manufacturing, shipping, and any credit card or Kickstarter fees, with only about $10 left over for celebratory pizza and beer. His original goal was to sell only 100 headsets, completely unaware of what was to come. Soon, industry masterminds such as Gabe Newell of Valve began to back the project, causing Palmer to raise over $1 million in the first 3 days, and thus began the production and development of what would shortly become the Oculus Rift. Development Kit 1, which will be referred to as DK1, began production shortly after the Kickstarter ran its course. The headset design featured a strap, a large lens for your eyes, and a protruding brick in the front. The design was very bulky, nor did it appear to be very comfortable. It had some air ventilation on the side, as well as minor adjustability controls, but it was not suitable for market quite yet. After all, it was just a prototype. In the years later, they perfected the design, upgrading the dev kit once more, releasing the Oculus Rift CV1 on March 28, 2016. This new headset featured a 90Hz refresh rate with 1080 by 1200 resolution per eye and a 110-degree field of view. It also featured integrated surround sound audio, further advancing the immersion. The CV1 also utilized the Constellation tracking system, which used cameras to track not only the headsets, but the controller's precise position in three-dimensional space. In 2016, just 4 short years after the initial Kickstarter raised $2.4 million, Facebook purchased Oculus for a whopping $2 billion. Since then, the company has released a variation of the CV1 entitled the Rift S, which utilized inside-out tracking, eliminating the need for the Constellation system. Oculus has made strides in making virtual reality ecosystems more accessible. For instance, even though the cost of the Rift S was significantly lower than that of the CV1, it was still lacking in some major areas, particularly the need for a computer. The Oculus Quest released on May 21st, 2019. It is a standalone VR headset that runs on Android. While it was less powerful than the other VR headsets that required the use of PCs, the portability made the headset very easy to attract customers that otherwise would not have gotten into virtual reality. This personally was my first dive into virtual reality, and needless to say, if I hadn't enjoyed it, I wouldn't be making this video. The Quest used the same inside-out tracking as the Rift, making it the only all-in-one headset at the time. Later that same year, it was announced that via a new product called the Oculus Link, it would double as a PC VR headset as well, allowing you to connect the headset to a PC and play PC VR exclusive games. For a while, it remained dominant as an incredibly popular headset for so-called veterans and newcomers alike. Last October, the Oculus Quest 2 was announced and released, and I can say with large amounts of confidence that it's the only headset I can recommend. For the low price of $300, including all required accessories, minus the link cable, it was a sleeker, smaller, and lighter version of the Quest, with some huge performance improvements, now supporting a high resolution and 90Hz refresh rate. Some downsides, however, such as the requirement to have a Facebook account. Although the company overall has some flaws, especially involving Facebook and privacy concerns, I look forward to what Oculus has in store next and some potentially upgradable features in the Quest 2. While HTC is primarily known for their smart home devices, they also have a significant following in their VR space. Without Valve, the Vive wouldn't exist. Around the same time that the Oculus Kickstarter took off, they were developing their first VR headset prototypes. They used simplified QR codes called April tags to calibrate the robotics and camera calibration for tracking. They simplified the display to avoid ghosting by using high refresh rate AMOLED displays. When combined, a bulky headset was able to output virtual reality without making the viewer nauseous. Around the same time, HTC was looking to expand out of the smartphone market. Looking at the success of Oculus, they had found the medium that they wanted to enter. It was the freshest new technology, and they wanted to hop on the bandwagon. The initial ideas were in the hands of the concepts team, wanting it to be part of their Re line of products, and it was originally to be called the Vive. However, soon the Re prefix was dropped from the name. According to Engadget, HTC approached the VR headset the same way it approaches phones: get in early and get in at the high end. Their work culminated in a soon-to-be collaboration with Valve. Once the partnership was set in stone, initial prototypes for dev kits were made. Of course, some changes were made, such as entirely changing how the tracking works. Switching away from April tags, they used a new system of laser tracking and dot tracking, similar to how motion capture works. Laser tracking fires specific lasers at specific targets on the headset and controllers, which then send a precise signal back to the station, allowing more fluid tracking. After a few more errors, as well as developments on the hardware side, the HTC Vive released on April 5th, 2016, had the same resolution as the Rift, and a Pro version released later. The Vive Cosmos released in 2020 with a 1440 by 1700 pixel per eye resolution, making it a quite significant improvement over the base HTC Vive, although the hefty $700 price tag makes it hard to recommend when compared to the Oculus Quest 2's resolution of 1832 by 1920 per eye. While Valve had major association with the HTC Vive, being the hardware supplier after all, in the background they had been working on the Valve Index since about 2015, the headset priced at $1,000 has been an unexpected hit in the VR community. The majority of the strong sales are due to the major release of Half-Life Alyx. The headset isn't necessarily special by any means, with the per-eye resolution being beat out by the aforementioned Quest 2, hitting only 1440 by 1600 in the LCD panel, with a field of view of roughly 120 degrees and a refresh rate up to 144 Hz. Oddly enough, for a headset released in 2019, the headset had a lot of somewhat primitive technologies, such as base stations. However, the hyper-precise tracking inside the controllers that allow for entire finger tracking is simply a technological marvel. Pimax is another lesser-known virtual reality company, although they are making seemingly unnecessary developments, flaunting their 8K virtual reality headsets, which I find odd considering the $1,500 RTX 3090 can barely squeeze out stable 8K performance in normal games. By now, you understand the developments in recent years and can probably form a foundation on where you think it should go next. Now this area is getting a little speculative and is based off of my opinion on where the VR industry should go, as well as why the sudden shifts have changed the gaming industry for the better. Personally, I think that VR communities will be split from here on out. HTC, Valve, Pimax, and Sony will continue revolutionizing VR as a whole, while also trying to copy it and take inspiration from Oculus in terms of accessibility, while Oculus takes those inspirations and makes them more accessible, improving their Quest line. For example, they'll most likely add 120Hz support and go all in on their hand tracking technology. Personally, I believe that the Oculus Quest 2's resolution should be the new target for virtual reality companies. The screen door effect is barely there, and the field of view is good enough. However, I feel that there is some room for improvement in which other companies could take advantage of. Virtual reality should be a smooth experience, as to not cause motion sickness. Aiming for higher refresh rates is the way to go. 120Hz should be the new standard, however, 90Hz is an acceptable bare minimum. With new computer hardware coming out on a regular basis, with Intel's 11th gen CPUs recently announced, the RTX 30 series and the AMD 6000 series being near impossible to get, and the Ryzen 5000 CPUs only just becoming easier to get, developers should be able to push more realism. As virtual reality gets more and more accessible, with 22.9% of Steam users owning a VR headset, I would hope that more mass franchises get VR support or some standalone or stripped down spin-off games that can urge people to hop on the VR train. Most VR games are generally an incredible quality, and the majority of well-known ones are well-known for a reason. They're generally considered must-plays. While I personally do not believe that Half-Life Alyx was the savior that people thought it would be, I'm eagerly awaiting the potential for the next huge game that everyone rushes out for. Virtual reality opens so many doors for so many new genres, as well as the ability to see old games in new lights. I mean, imagine something like Mirror's Edge in VR. That'd be nothing shy of incredible. Personally, I believe that the major thing holding virtual reality back is the complete lack of acknowledgement of the art with AAA developers. Almost all VR games are either Valve, Oculus, or HTC-owned studios, as well as some indie studios in the mix. This makes VR's library full of some very few select gems. Don't get me wrong, the good VR games are fantastic, and I wouldn't give them up for anything. However, if you really want people to adopt virtual reality, they need the big name publishers behind it. While AA studios such as the Hitman developers are incorporating bonus modes into their games, like Hitman 3 VR being exclusive to PlayStation VR, where it's really just a 3D movie, where you use the DualShock instead of the fancy Move controllers. I would take a well-established franchise, throw a VR minigame mode, or make a full VR port of an older game, which is really not that hard. I mean, Modders have been making VR versions of Doom, Minecraft, Pokemon, and several other franchises independently. If a small team can do it, I see no reason as to why EA or Ubisoft can't.